First in the country, the Iowa Caucus. We hear so much about the Iowa Caucus, yet it's very mysterious. How does a caucus work? Are caucuses the same in every state? Well, no, they're not. And there are some reforms that were passed just a little over a year and a half ago in which the caucus states have to become more inclusive, more open, and easier to access because many people in the past have complained that folks who can't make it to the caucus, physically make it to the caucus, are left out of the democratic process. So Iowa has a new set of caucus rules. It's not perfect. I will personally say that I think they failed in enacting the technological advancements. There was supposed to be a way for caucus goers to be able to caucus via technology through streaming services, but the DNC was unable to get that done in time. Hopefully next time around, but I think it's a big failure. With that being said, what happens in Iowa? I'm going to explain this to you. So this time around, it's a little, it's going to be tough because there are a lot of candidates. This isn't the first time a Democratic primary has had many candidates. 2008 was notable. There were several Democratic candidates. And even in 2016, going into the Iowa caucuses, you still had Martin O'Malley, who was running, and he actually was a bit of a kingmaker in some caucus sites. So let's go through this. You have participants to an Iowa caucus. They come in that day, and the caucus locations are listed on the Democratic Party site. You can find that out locally. If you're in Iowa, you probably know how to do it already because everybody is in Iowa right now. and if you don't know about the Iowa caucus living in Iowa, you don't have television, you don't have the radio, you don't have the internet. You're just not aware of what's going on in the world. If anybody has gone to Iowa, it is a magical expression of democracy. I think the people of Iowa are very passionate about their caucuses, and on years where the Democrats and the Republicans have a caucus, it's even more electric. And in 2016, I was there for visiting both caucuses, actually. And in some situations, they were in the same sites. So first you have a site. The site is picked by the Democratic Party. This will be important because in 2016, many of the caucus sites were overflowing. And at 7 p.m., the doors closed. And if you were not at your caucus site, you couldn't be part of the caucus. That was a big problem for Bernie Sanders. I don't think the Democrats in Iowa expected there to be such a big showing of young people, especially in Iowa. So many were left outside in the cold, waiting in line. They were asked to move to different caucus sites, but of course, those caucus sites, the doors had closed at 7 p.m. It was a real problem. And we haven't even gotten to the coin tosses. But this time around, we've been told that they're prepared for a historic turnout. Of course, locations are locations. You have an auditorium, you have a school, you have a gym. They can only hold so many people. So we're hoping that the local Democrats in Iowa, who do value democracy more than many other states, are taking this into consideration, and that the DNC is working closely with them to prepare for large turnout, which of course, in my opinion, favors Bernie Sanders. So we have the first count. What happens, you have the room, the room is separated by groups of supporters, and the supporters are for each candidate. Each campaign has the opportunity to have some supporters speak about their candidates. It's very old school. It's humble. It's a little bit of like an old-timey movie about democracy. It's awesome. So if you haven't actually been to one of these caucuses, find some of these online because they have been filmed. There are a lot of views on YouTube. I mean, I found some old clips, and I apologize because I took the videos vertically, but you can find some of my old clips on my YouTube channel of my filming some young people at the Iowa caucuses in Des Moines in 2016. So the first count, everyone gets counted, and the caucus organizers, the precinct captains, take note of which groups have less than 15% of the total. In most caucus locations, candidates will need at least 15% to be eligible to win delegates there. Groups that have more than 15% are viable. So you hear that word viable a lot. They're viable candidates. And the members of that group have to stay with that candidate. Then there's the second alignment. And if a voter's selection, their candidate, is not viable on the first alignment, some people say ballot, but it's really alignment, they have a few choices. If there's another candidate that they like, they could join that group. So, say Andrew Yang doesn't get 15%. Each Andrew Yang supporter has a choice of who they want to support. Alternatively, they could try to persuade other voters from non-viable candidates to join their group. So say Andrew Yang's supporters go to, who else is left? Tom Steyer's supporters, and they decide to group together and they are going to support Bernie Sanders. Or it could be Pete Buttigieg's supporters decide to work with Tom Steyer's supporters and they decide to support Joe Biden. That is why those other candidates that are not in the top tier are so important. And depending on the campaign and how democratic the campaign is, it could either be up to the supporters themselves, or the campaign could be advising them to go in a different direction. So the issue is there is a risk of falling short and not having enough votes to contribute to the allocation of delegates. So you'd have to have a group that would hit 15% and move over. And voters can also stay undecided and choose to sit out. So it's really interesting. This is where real old school politics comes in handy, and why it is so important that campaigns are out there, really 2 years in advance, working their butts off to make contact with voters, and why they have first, second, and third choices. The final count and the delegates that are distributed goes like this. They have another count that's taken. Sometimes this can go on all night because people get up and speak and they make their case. Every candidate who clears the viability threshold the second time around, the 15%, is awarded at least one delegate to the convention on behalf of Iowa, with more going to the candidates, obviously, with the most votes. So using this crazy mathematical formula, and this is another area where it might get a little tricky, this is where the local party, the state party, calculates how many state delegate equivalents that precinct gets. So it really does come down to the party and their interpretation and their mathematical equation. I don't necessarily understand the mathematical equation, to be honest. There are a lot of experts, and hopefully we'll have some on soon to go over this. But this is where it could potentially get fishy, and you could have strange delegate counts. It really depends on the state, too, and how they allocate delegates, but it's supposed to be reflective of the district. And in the case of caucuses, it's run a little bit differently. So at the end of the day, these are the delegates that go to the DNC representing Iowa. Now, as a side note, how do you become a delegate? Again, it comes down to states. So there's a great website if you're a Bernie supporter. It's called the Bernie Delegates Network, and it's berniedelegatesnetwork.org. You can go there and you can find out what your delegate rules are for your state. Many states have already decided which the campaigns have decided which delegates will go to the convention if they are awarded delegates. So right now, we haven't had any primaries or caucuses yet. We don't know who's won those primaries or caucuses and what percentage has been allocated. So in the case of Iowa, say, Bernie comes in with 65% and he gets, a certain number of delegates, and Biden gets, 35% and he gets a certain number of delegates. Bernie will have had his choice, his campaign will have picked based on the rules in that state, how many delegates are allocated. Or who is allocated as their candidate, as their delegates to the convention. So the key here is a lot of people want to get involved. They're just starting to pay attention. They're just getting activated. Maybe it's your first campaign, volunteering. You want to be a delegate. It depends on your state, but go to the bernieDelegatesNetwork.org and you can find out more information. I will be going over this more because as we get closer to certain primaries, there's different rules for those primaries. And of course, if one candidate keeps winning, then we're going to have a pretty amazing convention if that candidate is Bernie Sanders.